And on that note, it is my great pleasure. Where's Harley? I don't even see that. He's outside.
He's right here now.
Hey, Josh. That's about the friends that you make along the way, right? This is a friend I'm going to have for the rest of my life. This is going to be a friend to this community of Washington in a way we've never been represented in the past. Reproductive rights. He's going to stand up for us in the environment. He's going to stand up for public education. He's going to stand up for net neutrality. He's going to stand up for economic development. He's going to stand up for all the values that we hold dear. And I am so proud to stand with him. Ladies and gentlemen, Harley
how important it is to support all of these races. We have to flip as much red to blue as we can, not just in the congressional level, which obviously gets a lot of attention. We've got to do it at the state level. We've got to do it at the local level. This is going to become imperative for us to have the goal, accomplish the goals we want to accomplish along the way, and make sure we get the agenda we want on the table. I do have to tell you one story about Josh, and so Josh and I had breakfast at the Harbor House a few months ago, and we're talking, and there's this group of older gentlemen, you might say cantankerous older gentlemen, who were over in the corner. You could tell they were having a very spirited political debate, and as Josh and I are leaving, Josh goes, "Hey, let me introduce you to these guys." And walks me over, introduces me, and just with a twinkle in his eye and a wink, has me sit down and walks away. And about 45 minutes to an hour later, I got out of there. It's good for you. It was great. It was great. I felt like I was on the firing line. I felt like I was in a debate. It was good. You guys know a lot about Dana Warbacher. There's a lot of things we can talk about Dana Warbacher, how I'm different than Dana. Let's talk about the environment. Dana does not believe in climate change, and I believe it is the #1 issue facing humankind. Farms all are based on predictable weather patterns over the last 1,000 years, and if you change it because of increasing the temperature on the planet, you make obsolete in a few generations where we have built our homes, our cities, and our farms. I want you to think about that. This is the greatest infrastructure issue the world has ever faced, far beyond the widening of the 405. In fact, there's estimates of 200 million climate change refugees by the year 2050. You think about the corresponding wars and famine that will take place if we do not address this issue. So with every issue, we have an opportunity. The opportunity is to embrace clean tech, clean energy, green jobs, and make sure we do that right here in Southern California. So a big difference between Dana Warbacher and me on that, and I can talk about that a lot more, but I'm not going to. I can also talk about his position on home sellers, not having to sell their homes to gays and lesbians. Yet I've committed myself to signing the first piece of legislation I'm going to sign when I get to Congress is the Equality Act. Why is that the first piece of legislation? It's because our current president is doing everything to divide us. And to me, that legislation epitomizes what's important about our country, our fabric, and bringing us together. So I'm committed to signing that and showing the clear difference between me and Warbacher. I can also talk about his position on homelessness. He believes homelessness is a lifestyle choice. He did say this, a lifestyle choice. It's not a lifestyle choice. My wife and I built a shelter for homeless families in our 20s. I recognize, and my wife recognizes, and you guys all recognize, that this is not a lifestyle choice. This is an issue affecting our communities, and that we need to help these people in need. And we can talk about Russia. We really convicted felons, Paul Manafort, and actually takes checks from him, that he's had numerous trips to Russia. He's the only member of Congress who's been under investigation by Mueller's team. We can talk about that, but we're not going to talk about that either. There's a lot of things we could talk about with Daniel Rohrabacher, but the one thing I want to talk about is what happened most recently, and that was just 2 weeks ago. Just 2 weeks ago, he was on Fox News. And he had the audacity to suggest that Jeff Sessions, who I'm not a big fan of on his positions, but I will give him credit for behaving like an attorney general. He suggested that Attorney General Jeff Sessions should resign. Resign because he has failed his loyalty oath to President Trump. Jeff Sessions and every other member of Congress and elected official, including the Republicans there, did not take an oath to Donald Trump. They took an oath to the Constitution of the United States of America. And all we see right now is a swamp in Washington, D.C., led by Donald Trump, and spineless Republicans who are unwilling to step up and stand up to his bigotry. With a few exceptions, such as the great late John McCain. It's time that we get back to D.C. where we have common sense for common ground, that we are electing individuals who are willing to put country first, party second, who are willing to reach across the aisle and work to get the things done. I always talk about most Americans are between the 20-yard lines. There's so much more we have in common than what separates us. But we can't have our politics focused on what separates us and not what brings us together. Ultimately, everybody goes to office, regardless of whether it's state, federal, local, and you fight for what you believe in. But you don't keep fighting when you find areas of agreement. That's when you're supposed to do your job and at least implement what you agree on. And my commitment to you guys is doing just that. My commitment to you is to hold town halls. My commitment to you is to work with you and make sure you understand what legislation is coming up and have an opinion in it so that I can represent you because you are the voters of the 48th district. Thank you. Okay. You are the Did we have time for a few questions? Yes.
Just a general question about what is being done to counteract or what can be said about these excessive YouTube ads.
Right. Yeah, the excessive, the negative ads. Thanks for asking. So here's the good news. The Congressional Leadership Fund, which is a Republican super PAC, is spending $4 million in negative ads against me. That's the good news. That's the good news because they're scared. I was going to say scared something, but we'll just leave it at scared. But we do need to combat it. And we're combating it with the truth and also spending against it. And let me tell you the truth, the one ad that really just ticks me off is the one about the millions of dollars that I've made on sweatshops in China. So here's a quick story on that. I'm on a board called Rocky Brands. Rocky Brands is a publicly traded company that makes shoes and boots. They make those shoes and boots in Appalachia, Ohio, and Puerto Rico. They employ thousands and thousands of people. They make those shoes and boots for our U.S. military. They've done contracts under the last 4 presidents. And for firefighters, police, working families, union members across our country. This is an iconic company, an iconic brand that would have gone out of business in Appalachia. It's one of the few American shoe companies left. And I'm one of the few Democrats on their board. And for them to take shots at such an iconic company is so unfortunate because it shows how desperate they are. So we're going to keep fighting back and raise money to put the right narrative out there. And so far it's had very little impact on the polling. Yes?
Just to piggyback onto that, I'm in public relations and I actually watch all the ads and I watch this negative ads against you. And I slowed it down, paused it, and I read where the quotes were coming from. And it's all a bunch of nonsense, including the one that you're talking about with the sweatshops and the time frames. And that's kind of what people are seeing. They're seeing the bad quotes, but where they're coming from are nonsense quotes from things that barely even exist. And I've watched your new ad. There's a little bit of negative in the beginning. It's very positive at the end, and I really like positivity. I would like to see if once you're running ads, to see positive stuff about you within, say, like the LA Times, the Register, the local papers, the Sun, the Running, whatever in each community that you are going to represent. Use real quotes, because his nonsense, I was trying to be nice, they're nonsense.
Right.
And they're not real.
Yeah, exactly. Good advice. Thank you. Yes?
I was gonna suggest that you use your Jason Alexander video on TV. It's wonderful.
The Jason Alexander debate. Okay. Yeah, unfortunately, we're the second most expensive media market in the country, so I don't think we can air that one. Yeah, this is I think you guys have heard the stat that Dana Rohrabacher has only passed 3 bills in his 30 years in office. And most recently, 14 years ago. Which was actually an amendment to the 2 bills he had passed years before that. But here's the worst part of it. In 30 years, he's only submitted 161 bills. That's not a lot of bills for being there for 30 years. For somebody that ought to have some juice, right? Because they've been there for 30 years. And of those 161 bills he submitted, almost half of them have one sponsor. Him. That's it. He didn't find one more member of Congress to add their name to the bill. Not one. That shows you how out of touch he is, not just with us here, but even the people he works with in Congress. Thanks. Yes?
About 2 years ago, and I don't know if it's you, but I'm curious now. About 2 years ago, I saw a vivacious speaker at the very first Little Beach Women's rally, right there on Main Beach. Did you speak at that about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago?
Sure, I'll take credit.
My concern and my colleagues' concern across the state is higher education. And right now, with the, I want to call it the leader of the Department of Education, she doesn't know what's going on, and she has people trying to get bills passed. And there's one that's been sitting around and got kicked out. It's the Promise Act, which would gut higher education. And the community colleges, as well as the higher education 4-year schools, are looking for a real good higher education bill that would help our students, particularly dreamers and those that need financial aid. You've got to do something.
And listen, I'd encourage everyone to go to harleyforcongress.com and read my position on higher education. I think, I always talk about how K through 12 made sense post-World War II, but in today's world we need to have P through C. And what I mean by that, we are competing in a global economy. And in a global economy, if we want to win, we have to have the smartest, best educated kids and workforce in the world. So that starts from preschool all the way through college, in addition, or trade schools with unions. And when I talk about when I move into college or trade schools, I talk about providing it for free for the lower socioeconomic level. And actually use the lower quartile. And I'm going to take a minute here, because this is really important to me and I'm passionate about it. And let me tell you why I think it's so important. If you take that lower quartile and assume that lower quartile of 18-year-olds now has an opportunity to go to the 4-year nonprofit college of their choice that they've been accepted into, with a work-study program attached to it, or trade school. Who here thinks there's a greater chance they're going to be in the middle class? Right? Right. So that means they're going to pay higher taxes over the next 40 years, which will more than pay for the cost of that education. Second, they'll have less impact on social services over that same time period. Third, they're going to have more discretionary income, which means they're going to raise every single business in America by being able to spend in the businesses we all represent here and across our great country. And fourth, they're going to break the cycle of poverty. So this is a no-brainer to do something along these lines. It would certainly be exactly what our country needs to move our workforce, making sure we have, again, the smartest kids in the world. And we have to see just the opposite happening right now. We see Pell Grants decimated since Lyndon Baines Johnson implemented. So it's something I believe very much in. I'm passionate about it. And we also need to address student debt along with it as well. And the last thing I want to say on this, and I apologize, is sometimes the reaction to a lot of people would be, well, how the hell are you going to pay for it? Right? All right. So we just did a tax plan that added by most estimates somewhere between 1.8 and 2.2 trillion dollars. Now at 2%, that's $40 billion a year in interest payments on that transfer of wealth to the richest people in the country. Everybody with me so far? $40 billion just in interest payments. Guess what it would cost to educate the bottom quartile of our country? The bottom 25% of 18-year-olds in a 4-year nonprofit college of their choice, $20 billion. So the question is, as a country, where are our priorities? What is most important to us? To make sure the rich get a tax cut, or to make sure we have the brightest, best educated kids in the world? And it is $20 billion to take care of the bottom quartile, then let's spend a little bit more and make sure that we phase it out and get as many people through college. Because the last thing we want to do is have the cost of getting into college preventing us from having the best kids, best educated kids in the world.
My question relates to that. When I was a younger girl and a young student, the country spent so much on research and development, and research and development is really important for jobs of the future. And I personally am very, very concerned that we're not spending anywhere near what we should be on that. I was wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, that is part of it. Part of the again, good my education plan, you'll see that there's also a focus on STEAM, STEM plus STEAM. Yeah, STEAM. You got to have architectural and arts in there too. It's an important part of the rest of STEM. And we have to have a focus on it, but also we have to make sure that we are hiring teachers, that the best teachers paying them well, and also in our universities providing appropriate research support to allow them to educate our kids. One more thing on this too. Often we look at these issues as to whether it's a Democrat or Republican supported issue. And the idea of providing free education. The state of New York has passed free college education for all kids with families of income $150,000 or less. But you'll say, Harley, New York is a Democratic state, Democratic governor, Democratic legislature. And I say, yes, you are correct. But in Tennessee, which is a red governor and a red legislature, they have something similar, almost identical, with one exception. They don't limit it to those of $150,000 or less. It's available to every single kid in Tennessee to get a free college education, because Tennessee recognizes whoever has the smartest kids wins. This is not a Democrat or Republican debate. Let's get on it.
How would you compare your stance on healthcare versus Dana, please?
Well, I think we've seen Dana continually, his healthcare is to decimate the ACA, not believe in protecting those who can least protect themselves. I talk a lot healthcare about, the quick of it is this, if you'll bear with me for just a second, because I think for some of you that have not heard this before, it's worth hearing. There's roughly 200 countries in the world. And of those 200 countries, there are 40 industrialized developed countries. Of those 40 industrialized developed countries, 39 of them have universal health care. Only one does not. The richest, most successful country in the history of the world, the United States of America. Those 200 countries follow one of 4 plans. The first plan is called the Beveridge Plan, which started in England. And in the Beveridge Plan, the government owns the hospital, staff, nurses, and doctors all work for the hospital. The second plan was the Bismarck Plan, which started in Germany, and that is where the employers and the employees provide the funding mechanism for providing universal health care, with 2 key differences, because we're very familiar with that here in the United States, with 2 key differences. One, that provides health care for everybody in the country, not just the employees and their families. And second, the underwriters are nonprofits versus for-profits like we have here. The third model is a national model. Many countries follow that, and we typically associate that with Canada. And that's just a national tax to provide health care for for all the citizens. And then there's a fourth model, and that's no model at all. That's where you pay for health services when you receive them, you barter for them, or you simply go without them. Ironically, the United States has all four models. The first model is the Veteran Affairs. The government owns a hospital, everybody works for it. The second model, we're familiar with that, the employer funded model. The third model, national, that's Medicare. And the fourth model for 30 million Americans, no model at all, no coverage at all, we've got that too. Because our system is screwed up and patchwork together is why we spend 18.5% of our GDP on healthcare, which is twice as much as those other 39 industrialized developed countries. Oh, but Harley, we must have the healthiest people in the world if we're spending twice the GDP that they are. Unfortunately, we don't. We tend to be in the bottom quartile of all major metrics when we look at how we score against those other industrialized developed countries. Inability to pay healthcare bills is the leading cause of personal bankruptcy in the United States. It is a leading cause of homelessness here in our country. So what do we do about it? Well, first of all, as I stated, 18.5% of our GDP is tied to this. So we have to look at what can we do to move forward without disrupting almost 1/5 of our economy. And I think there's three things we need to do. One, I call it open Medicare for all. And what I mean by that is allow anybody, individual, family, or business who wants to buy into Medicare, buy in. If you want to stay in the private insurance market, stay in the private insurance market. But if you want another option, here it is. That would help Medicare because it would provide a greater distribution of their patient base, and it would lower prices for those who want to go in. Second, reinstate the individual mandate. I don't know about you guys, but I like it when everybody driving has insurance, and I like when everybody on my street that owns a house has insurance. And I think if you can afford Medicare's ability to negotiate big pharma prices. Taxpayers provide subsidies for these corporations to create the drugs, only to double charge us and sell it for half the price in other parts of the world. It's crazy. Yes?
So our daughter, her best friend's sorority sister was killed in the DC Santa Barbara shooting. And I'm very proud of the kids that come into and stepped up, that he led us, I believe, as a nation into some real thinking about our ethical laws and the NRA. What is your position on assault weapons and the NRA's?
Thank you. The question for those outside who might not have heard it is my position on addressing gun violence. And I'm sorry to hear that. And unfortunately, we hear similar stories all the time. I think most of you probably know the shooting in Las Vegas. 25% of the victims were from Southern California. So there were many, many families here that were touched by that. And there's so many tragic cases of it, but it's not just gun violence with mass shootings, it's also suicides. Since 1968, there have been more gun deaths in the United States than every death on a battlefield in the history of our country. I want you to let that sink in. Since 1968, we have killed each other with guns more than every death since the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Civil War, 2 World Wars, Korean War, Vietnam War, the Afghanistan War, the Iraq War, and every skirmish in between. This is an epidemic, and we need to address it. So how do we address it? California has a great set of laws. That's why California has one of the lowest gun death percentage in the country. And it recognizes that you need a waiting period, you need background checks, you need to ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, you need to ban those who are on the no-fly list from being able to buy guns, and that's common sense gun legislation, which most Americans, red or blue, support. The reason it doesn't get passed is because we have politicians such as Dana Rohrabacher in the pockets of the NRA. And while we're on him being in the pocket of the NRA, I assume everybody saw Sacha Baron Cohen. So I mean, if you go, for those of you that are older, go Google Archie Bunker addressing hijackings. And it's about as commonsensical as what Archie Bunker suggested they do. And the idea of training and arming school children is ridiculous. And that is exactly what Dana Warbacher said. Now, it came out that he said, kindergartners or kindergartians, as the spoof said. But he qualified his comments. I don't know if everyone here knows that he qualified his comments to say, I would never suggest that kindergartners should be trained and armed. I was talking about high school students. And there'll be a limited number of guns on the premises for them to use. This is not how you solve gun violence. And we need to recognize that the Second Amendment is, the right to bear arms is the law, and I support that law. But I also support what Antonio Scalia said, that liberal Justice Antonio Scalia, who said, the rights under the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are not absolute rights. They are limited rights. And it was specifically talking about the Second Amendment. He said, paraphrasing, that the right to bear arms does not mean you can carry any gun, anytime, anywhere you want. We are allowed to put reasonable regulations to prevent gun violence as a society. All we have to do is vote them out who take the NRA's money.
Dana Warbacher take accolades when you know that he wants to oil drill. I mean, it's absolutely hard. I want you there so that you can be there for the surf riders in Huntington Beach, and you can accept that because I know that you don't want oil drilling.
I think 50% of the oil used in the state of California is for cars. We certainly need to move to cleaner technology. We certainly shouldn't have any more offshore drilling. We certainly need to eliminate fracking. We need to be focused on clean tech, clean energy. And Warbacher even said that it's good for the fish because of the and it just shows you how out of touch he is. But you know what? And I'll take a second. I really think it's important when we think about these things, we think about how these things aren't in silos. So we have been spending as a country in incentives for fossil fuels. For every $1 we spend on clean energies, we spend $80 on fossil fuels. And we've been doing that for decades and decades and decades. Now let me ask you, if that had been reversed in 1970, 1980, where would we be right now?
Right.
What do you think our Middle Eastern policy when it comes to dealing with countries that have the oil that we no longer need would be? Instead of focusing on fostering democracies and human rights, we've allowed our need to rely on oil to cause a foreign policy that for many of us doesn't feel comfortable. And plus, it's not right. Clean tech, clean energy is better for our health, better for our environment, better for our kids, better for our grandkids, better for climate change, and better for business. It's just no brainer. Let's get it going.
What do you propose to do about the homelessness crisis? What would you specifically do?
The question is, what would I do on the homelessness crisis? When my wife and I did this, and I'll tell the story very quick. My wife, when we were in our 20s, she read an article in the New Yorker magazine about the plight of homeless families. And at that time, what would typically happen is you lose your job, you eventually lose your house, you can't make mortgage payments, you stay in a hotel for a while, and then you live in your car, and then you finally realize you can't continue this way, and you go to a shelter. And what would typically happen is they would take the men and the older boys and send them to the men's shelter, and they'd send the women and the young children to the women's shelter. When the only thing they have left is each other, they're separating the family, much like our current president does at our border with Mexico. It's not the time to separate families. So the idea was to create a shelter because step one is you want to keep the family intact. You want to help the family overcome any issues, whether it's training, education, medical issues, mental issues, whatever the challenges may be, to make them functioning as best they can. From that emergency housing, you move them then to abated housing, allow them again to get back into society, to be the citizens they want to be, to subsidized housing, to out on their own. Recognizing there are some people that are homeless because they have mental challenges they're dealing with that are significant and not being addressed by today's healthcare system. So that is the process you need to go through. How do you fund it and how do you do it? That has to be a three-pronged effort between local, state, and government. Local, state, and federal government. Locally, we have in Orange County supervisors who are unwilling to release funds that are needed for this purpose. At the state level, we have the legislature is trying to do it, but I don't think they're addressing it because it's anywhere you drive around our state, we know how significant this issue is. And third, you need HUD at the federal level committed to solving this problem as well. In my opinion, this is a FEMA type need that we have across our country and really significantly here in California. And that would be the way I would push for, to make sure that we get everybody on the table and work together. And we have to get over to the maybe not in my backyard mentality, because guess what? It's in your backyard.
One thing I want to say before I call the number up, please, I hope you were inspired tonight. Sign up to volunteer for something. It doesn't matter what it is. It's really important that we think on this